Xavier may not be exactly happy with what he finds out when he gets there, because hell is not a nice place and not going to be partying. It's going to be a lot of suffering. I'm talking to Bill Scott. He has written a book entitled The Day Satan Called, A True Encounter with Demon Possession and Exorcism. I was saying before the program, about 15 years ago, my wife and I were contacted by a young woman. I think she called me after a TV show. And it led to about a year of the two of us dealing with this young girl who was raised in a satanic cult and was demon possessed. And some of the things that you're sharing are things that we experienced. I would get a call in the middle of the night and she would be someplace and didn't know how she got there. And I would sit with her and pray with her. And when I prayed with her, I would take anything sharp out of her hands, right, because her eyes would have this evil look, and she would snarl, actually, and her hands would, come up into this, and she would look at me like she was about to attack me. It was probably one of the most intriguing and yet chilling years of our life. And we ended up getting her into church and so forth, and then she disappeared. I'm not sure what happened to her. But as we're talking, I've experienced this. Right. So it's not something that, I'm incredulous at, because some of the things you're experiencing, not to the degree that you are, but some of the things that you're talking about are things we experienced with this young woman. If I talked about Jesus to her and I mentioned Jesus, she was like an animal. Yeah. And God began to work in her life, and I would take her to church, and she would always want to sit on the back seat, and so she could run if she needed. It was crazy. I never wanted that experience. I didn't ask for that experience, and I wouldn't want that experience again.
Well,
what about you?
I'm the same way. I find that most people that have had any kind of experience like this, they don't go out and seek it again. I mean, it'd be crazy to go seek it. If God put it in my path, would I deal with it? Yeah, and hopefully with a lot more wisdom. What would you do
different? If you had this to do over again, what would you do different?
One, I wouldn't bring her home. I think you need to have.
We didn't, a couple of times she had to stay with us because I picked her up in the middle of the night. Right. She would come home and she'd stay with us for a day or two, and then she would have to leave.
Yeah, I think there's boundaries for your home. Your home has to be your sanctuary, so your outreach doesn't have to be what you bring home. That was a mistake. Secondly, I know my authority now more. It's not going to be just a dog and pony show, where Satan can do whatever he wants. I'll never forget during that time I called one friend and said, "We need you now." And they said, "She's had demons for years. Why now?" "We have plans for tonight. We'll schedule it for tomorrow night." Wow. I thought that was the most uncaring, heartless thing I'd ever heard. But later they shared, it's not Satan's timetable, it's God's. He's not going to run the show. And they were walking in their authority. They knew she'd be okay, and that they would take care of it the next night. And so I think I'd have boundaries. And you got to have people walk with you. You've done it for up to a year. You said it's very tiring to interact with that kind of a battle spiritually.
Well, and I found pastors who dealt with this type of thing on a pretty regular basis, and I would take her to them. Yes. Because I was like you, I was a bit over my head. I didn't quite know how to deal with this. There were pastors that they had dealt with this a lot, especially some of the inner city pastors. And so I would take this woman to him. The thing we talked about at the beginning of the program, Bill, was that most people don't believe that this kind of stuff exists. Right. How do you respond to that when people tell you that? To Christians, I'm talking about Christians. Right. I'm talking about independent Baptists who would say to you today, "Come on, Bill, you're living in La La Land."
No, we're not. I mean, Ephesians chapter 6 is very clear that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities. But even in our little church, we'd quote that and we'd keep going real quick. Let's not unpack that, because if we did, what does that actually mean? And it's amazing. I'm hearing more and more on Facebook from people that went, "Bill, I've never told anybody, but there was this one experience I had, sometimes with an individual. Sometimes things went bump in the night, but they know in their heart of hearts they had an encounter with evil." But because it's so taboo to talk about in our churches, it's like this battle's going on, it's slaying people, but everybody's sitting there smiling like, it never happens.
Well, we talk about spiritual warfare, but we don't think in terms, when we think about spiritual warfare, we think about we didn't get a parking place today.
Right, right.
Or, something that's really pretty minor.
Right.
We have a problem with a child or problem in our marriage relationship, and that's spiritual warfare. But in other countries, especially African countries and some of the Eastern European countries, what we're talking about is very, very common.
Yeah, you wouldn't catch anybody by surprise. They'd go, well, yeah, of course that happens.
Well, Shirley and I were in Liberia a few months ago, and there it's common because you have so much spiritism, so much of that going on, Satanism and demonic activity and rituals and so forth. I mean, honest to goodness, huge billboards in Monrovia, Liberia, that says, "Say no to murder and ritual killings."
Wow.
Now, so you look at that and you think, man, there's something going on here that's pretty scary. So that's pretty common there, and they understand it, and they're not necessarily intimidated by it, and pastors there tend to be able to deal with it more. I don't think we're really prepared to deal with that kind of thing here because we don't see it or we don't experience that much of it.
Yeah, we don't, and it's not talked about, and some people that have, they just keep it quiet because they think people are going to think they're crazy, so they don't talk about little things that have taken place in their home. Or had a boy the other day call me, and he watched Halloween, the movie. Ever since then, he's wanted to kill his parents. And he's like, I know it started that night. And so a lot of times we just don't dig to find out, is this a spiritual warfare deal? Now, I believe there's mental illness, totally get that.
Well, that does bring up an important point. How do you distinguish the difference between just a deep psychological problem and satanic possession, where that person just needs good counseling?
Right, because sometimes there's counseling, sometimes there's medication or some therapy. I know in the case of this young lady, somebody asked me the other day, how do you know she just wasn't mentally off and having a chemical imbalance or multiple personality or whatever? And I said, I know those things can happen, but when the lights start turning on and off and things start walking around your home, we've gone from mental illness to, no, there's some spiritual warfare that's taking place in my home. But I would always get with a group of people that have dealt with this and say, okay, here's the individual. What do you think? I wouldn't call it on your own because you could do a lot of damage by trying to cast a demon out of somebody who's emotionally distraught.
When you're really not,
and
when
or
you're
chemical
really not
imbalance.
prepared to do that. And
Exactly.
they're not prepared for that to happen.
Yeah, always get with people that have walked this road. Boy, I would do that in a heartbeat.
What kinds of responses have you gotten from your book?
It's been more positive than what I thought. I mean, as far as I thought people would say, you're crazy, I can't believe this, especially what I would call mainstream denominations. But I'm hearing from people that go to Lutheran churches, Church of Christ, Baptist churches going, you know what? This has been so taboo. It is refreshing to talk about the warfare in which we're facing. And you've opened my eyes to open doors and that Satan is very real. So it's been very positive. I'm shocked, really, at the stories that I'm hearing. And just more so, you've opened my eyes. Matter of fact, I got one just before I went on the show. A mom said a young 12-year-old started listening to the audio tape of the book. And by the time she realized what was happening, she's on chapter 6. She's like, no, that may be too young. She said, Mom, I'm on chapter 6. I got to finish. And she's like, okay. So she let her. And she said, I realized when she was done, she wasn't in the den. So I went searching for her. She said, I found my 12-year-old after finishing the book with the book here, the Bible here, and a notepad.
Wow.
And she says, what are you doing? She goes, Mom, I'm looking up every verse that Bill put in here. I want to make sure that I'm prepared to fight the battle of spiritual warfare. This was a 12-year-old. And I'm like, wow. And those are the eyes that we need to open. So it's been very positive at this point as far as people receiving it.
Was there times during this that it was affecting your life negatively? That it was affecting even you and your wife's relationship negatively?
Absolutely.
Because some of the people who dealt with this woman ended up having some pretty serious marriage problems.
Yeah, there was a number that went through a divorce, and I did years ago. And I think people say, well, did she put a curse on you? Well, I think if you're living for God and you've got all your doors closed, so to speak, it doesn't matter if somebody's putting a curse on you or not. But I do think Satan's very patient, and he waits for those open doors.
Well, it's interesting because in the scriptures, in fact, the Apostle Paul was going through a town, and some guys came along, and they decided that this was a pretty profitable potential, this delivering people of demons and so forth. So they gave it a shot, and the demons almost killed them.
Yeah, it didn't work out well
prepared for this. No, it didn't work out. And I think what is to be said for that is anytime there's spiritual warfare, you need to make sure that you're close to the Lord or get out of the way.
Or get out of the way. And you really need a group of people that are covering you in prayer. Even while writing this book, boy, I got as many people as I could to really cover us in prayer. And I spent a lot of time in the Word.
What has this done for you and your wife spiritually?
You know, I think we are more bold in our faith. We walk with more of an authority, but we also realize not to let our guard down. That Satan is like a roaring lion, so to speak. And I went to Africa not long ago, and I saw those lions in the bush just waiting on their prey, and the prey had no clue that they're 10 feet away from absolute disaster attack. And I see Satan the same way. And so I think my guard is up. I'm in the Word on a regular basis because I know I have to have on, all the armor of God.
You know, a young boy with Youth with a Mission made an incredible impression on my life one time. He dressed weird, and this was years ago. He's dressed weird and had on these weird clothes, and he was doing a lot of youth ministry. And at first I didn't even want to interview the young guy, and so then I finally said, okay, fine, we'll do the interview. And one of the first questions I asked him, he had a ministry in Amsterdam, one of the most sinful places in the entire world. I mean, it's drugs, prostitution, everything you can imagine. And they were right in the middle of all of that every day, ministering to people. And so I asked him, I said, how could you possibly do that and not be affected spiritually? And I was directing the question because I was almost saying to him, you are affected spiritually, just looking like that.
Right.
And he looked at me and he really revolutionized my life. He said, that's a very good question, because if my wife and I ever walk down the streets of Amsterdam and we don't feel the horror of sin, he said, we leave for 2 weeks and pray and fast until we have a sensitivity to the horror of sin. Because if we don't, then we'll be overwhelmed by it. And that's what we're talking about here.
Well, you know, it's
understanding of what sin is, and you have an understanding of what sin is and what it can do.
Well, I do. There's payment always required for sin, and the book's not to scare you; it's to give you an idea of the power of Satan. So you have not necessarily a fear, but a respect. And so that way you walk in the power of Christ, because as soon as you stop fearing Satan, you're going to be taken out.
Relationship with Christ is absolutely essential in all this.
It's everything.
How can they get the book?
They can go online. They go to any Christian bookstore, Barnes & Noble, anywhere.
Who's the publisher?
It is FaithWords.
FaithWorks, and it's available in Christian bookstores. I really would, especially with all of the stuff on television today and the films, you know, mentioned Twilight and Harry Potter and all this stuff out there, this would be a really good book to read and then pass to a friend, because sin is real. The devil is real. And the more we understand that, the better off we're going to be. We don't have to be afraid of him, but we have to understand that he's there and make sure that our relationship with Christ is such that we're not messing around with it. The book is entitled The Day Satan Called, A True Encounter with Demon Possession and Exorcism. I would encourage you to get a copy of it. Read it. You also have a youth ministry, right? I
do. I've been involved with kids for probably about 20 years, and just love working with this generation. There's nothing better.
Do you have a website that people can go to?
We do. If you just, everything's connected to the book, so thedaySatanCalled.com. There's even a free chapter there if anybody wants to read it free.
ThedaySatanCalled.com.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. All squeezed together.
All squeezed together.
All right. Hey, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are you facing adversity? Well, if so, I have some encouraging words for you when we return. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.